All right, hello, and it's silverkyle, and today I am going to be reviewing The Shining by Stephen King. Now, this is his third published novel. Prior to this, we had Carrie and Salem's Lot, which I have read as well. And for this review, we're going to have a non-spoiler review with my full rating and everything, and then we're going to get into some major spoilers, but I'll make it very obvious when we get to that section. For the story itself, I'm really only going to talk a little bit about what they have in this flap here, and there's not really a lot to go on here. So what we have is this story centers around this family, Jack, Wendy, and their son Danny. Outside of that, there are a few other characters here and there, but for the most part, it is mainly this family. As what happens is that Jack is kind of down on his luck, and he ends up taking this job to be a caretaker for this big hotel that's kind of off the beaten path by quite a bit, that closes down for the winter because it would be too hard for people to get there during the winter. You'd need the snow plows, and they're not really going in that area because there's nothing else out there. It's literally just this overlook hotel. So he ends up taking care of it for the winter, and they kind of see this as a place to kind of restart and rejuvenate the marriage between Jack and Wendy, his chance to kind of redeem himself while he writes as well, because generally in a Stephen King novel, there is a writer. Jack is a writer that is writing a screenplay and also caretaking at this overlook hotel. And that's really all that you get. There is also The Shining, and they kind of allude to it in the flap, but I don't really want to talk about that. It is an interesting aspect, but I'll talk more about that when we get to the actual spoilers here. So for The Shining, I really enjoyed Carrie, and I loved Salem's Lot. And I know the story of The Shining. I'd seen the movie with Jack Nicholson prior to this, years ago. And so I was really excited to dive into this. But to me, the biggest part that I love about Stephen King is the social conversations that he has between characters. Either it could be strangers, and it's the day-to-day minutia that they talk about that, to me, Stephen King just purely excels at. That to me is just so... I have not met any other author that able to do that as well as Stephen King. His conversations are top notch. And because you're dealing with mainly just three characters and the child is only 5 years old, you're not really getting that aspect as much as you normally would from the previous works that I had read from him. I will say, however, though, that Danny, the 5-year-old, is the best written character and the biggest positive of The Shining, which I did not see coming at all. Normally, children are absolutely by far the most boring characters that you can get in a story, and I never look forward to them. I always hope that there's no children in stories because I really don't feel like they add that much most of the time. But in this, excellent. Stephen King gives us the point of view of Jack, Wendy, and Danny constantly throughout this book. And when it goes to Danny, he has encapsulated the exact thoughts of what a 5-year-old would think. So he goes through his entire thought process when Danny does not understand something. Stephen King will explain what Danny is thinking and what his mind is trying to create when he doesn't understand something. So he understands part words, so he tries to connect that to things, and it's great. It's exactly how I feel a child would actually think. And I mean, it's been a while, but I can kind of put myself back to when I was a child and having to try to put things together. And it's very similar to this, but it's not something that I consciously ever thought of until I read it here in The Shining, and Stephen King kind of put it out in the forefront. So that by far is the best part of this book. Everything else is kind of just okay. This is like a thriller type horror book a little bit, and there are moments of that, but I mean, this is nearly 50 years old at this point in time, and I find that it's very difficult to be scared in a book. I feel like you can sometimes have a creepy atmosphere, and there are definitely moments, I guess, where they are kind of creepy, but they were, to me, much weaker than I had read in other books. So I don't feel that maybe because of the time period, maybe 50 years ago, this would have been like terrifying. And a lot of the ideas that I thought that were presented here did feel a little bit dated. That wasn't the case with Salem's Lot and Carrie, though, which were prior to this. So that is something interesting to note. I kind of just felt like at the end of it that it was an okay story. By far, Danny was the best part. Everything else was that I think was really the meat, or what the meat should have been for this story, was kind of a letdown. So I'm going to give it 2.5 out of 3 stars. And I'm going to give it 3 stars on Goodreads because it is definitely closer to the 3 stars than the 2. But it was just okay. And I actually did read this with 2 friends at the same time, and we all kind of felt the same way. That it was just kind of there, not necessarily amazing, and it's okay. Now we're going to get into some spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, we're going to be diving into that. So The Shining is Danny can read people's minds. And there are a few other people in the world that can do this as well. There was somebody else that was there that kind of told him and explained him what The Shining was. And it's an interesting aspect. It's an interesting part of the story because Danny will sometimes just randomly, and I think that that's where we could have really dived into some interesting parts here if we would have had a lot more characters, because Danny, whenever he meets somebody, he'll kind of read their mind and kind of explain what's going on in their mind. And I like that a lot. Some hilarious moments, actually. I laughed out loud when they got to the hotel and not everybody had left yet. And there was a woman there that was looking at one of the good-looking guys. And in her mind, she was thinking, I want to get into his pants. And Danny is 5 years old, and he doesn't understand. Why does she want to get into his pants? Is she cold? Does she think that being in his pants will warm her? Is there enough room for her to be in his pants at the same time? It's great. And I wanted more of that. Every once in a while, there's some moments of brilliance like that. And I feel that if we would have had a lot more characters, we could have had some more hilarious moments, but also just some interesting little tidbits of what these people are thinking of. And I think that King does great character work. So that to me, I think would have been the best positive had they gone in a different route for The Shining. In terms of the horror elements, the Overlook Hotel is essentially this spirit being, something like that, where it is kind of evil and a lot of crazy things have happened in the past. I did like kind of reading a little bit about the history of the Overlook, but I feel like I think it should have been conveyed maybe in a different way so that it could have been a little bit more interesting when you are finding about this history. I love lore. I love hearing about history. But for the most part throughout this, I didn't feel that when it was being told to me, I wasn't as interested as I am in other books or other ways that they can kind of show me that. Carrie did a good job with that. There was newspaper clippings and stuff. It really worked for the Carrie story, I feel. But because it was a very different kind of novel, but it didn't work as well for The Shining. In terms of the ending, it does get a little bit more interesting because Jack at that point just goes absolutely crazy. And it's not really him anymore. It's really almost like the embodiment of the Overlook that has taken over Jack's mind. And because that he was already so close to snapping because of everything else that had been going on with his life, he kind of has a breakdown. And Danny can sense that, and they want to basically kill Danny so that they can use his body, and then they'll be able to consume. If he gets killed there, they'll be able to consume his spirit, and the Overlook Hotel would be even stronger. So that's some interesting aspects. But I feel like every time that you would find out something, it would just be like, oh, we're just going to tell you this, and it didn't have that impact and the right build up towards it when you would find out something like that. So that's pretty much it. The Shining was just kind of okay. Salem's Lot to me was probably scarier because of the tone and atmosphere that was created there. Carrie wasn't scary. I just felt like I felt bad for Carrie. I just felt so incredibly bad for Carrie. And then you have this, which is kind of different. It's a mix of a lot of different things. I'm still definitely looking forward to reading a lot more Stephen King, as this was my only fourth novel. The other one that I read was Billy Summers. And Billy Summers, my favorite part of Billy Summers is right in the middle when you're having the conversation between Billy and another character that he meets kind of midway through the story. And they're just kind of living in an apartment and talking. And that's my favorite part of that book. King just does so good with the conversations. So that's it. That's everything. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of The Shining. And I will also be rewatching The Shining with Jack Nicholson and directed by Stanley Kubrick to kind of see how I feel it compares with the novel, because I haven't seen that movie in about 20 years now. So that's going to be fun. Thank you all for watching. You have been bearded in. Beardage.